Hello, and welcome to Templar On The Run, the podcast pulling back the veil of Freemasonry and shining its light wherever we can. This is Brother Bryce Baker with
Brother Wayne Ross, and we are both from Meridian 47 in Meridian, Idaho. Thank you for your interest in the world's oldest fraternity.
everyone. Welcome back to Templar On The Run. This is again Bryce Baker here with
Brother Wayne Ross from Meridian 47 in Meridian, Idaho. Down here at Unbound in Meridian, the lovely facility that allows us to use the space and put out all the hot air that we like to put out.
Yeah, definitely. And today we've got a special guest with us, Brother Kevin Henderson. He's from our lodge as well in Meridian 47. He's Scottish Rite, 32nd degree, and Knights of St. Andrew.
Yes, the Knights of St. Andrew.
Perfect. Well, we're here to talk about Catholics and Freemasonry and the kind of different timelines and things that lead up to that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the Knights of St. Andrew before we get into that? Because I feel like that's something that not a lot of people outside of Freemasonry know about.
Well, the Knights of St. Andrew is a part of the Scottish Rite, and its function is to volunteer service to fellow Masons, to the community. Whatever requests are made, we do it voluntarily, and that is our function. And we usually, the past couple of years, we've worked Treeford for the shrine. We've helped move the OES materials from the old Masonic building to the Scottish Rites. So we serve, and we serve any request that's made through a Masonic organization.
That's cool. I've yet to see you wear a kilt, though.
Yes. It's coming, but I need to go have it fitted more than trying to order it over the internet. And the closest place to get one here is in beautiful Salt Lake City. So I will make the trip over there, and I will, because I'm from Northern Ireland and we have our own kilt for the Henderson family. So I will get a kilt for the Henderson family instead of the all-purpose Irish kilt or Scottish kilt.
Cool.
5 hours to show off the knees. It's worth it.
Yes. Well, right now they're having a sale. They're $398 for the whole suit. So I'm hopeful I can make it over sooner than later.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then what degree, just out of curiosity, is it the 18th degree that's the Knight of St. Andrew? Or is it later?
It's the 27th degree.
27th. That was 9 off. That's okay.
Right. Yeah, it's the 27th degree, and it's a very, it is becoming a knight, and the knights are referred to as sir, and we have a venerable master. So, and as I said, we serve. That's our function.
Yeah, it's an interesting locational degree, because as you know, going through it, you've got a lot of the other knight-oriented ones earlier, Knights of the East and West, so on and so forth. And then at the 25th, you've got the Sufi degree, and then the 27th, you're into St. Andrew, and then later on, as you push it even further, you get to the 31st and stuff, and then you move it up into the Egyptian degree, and so it sort of has a nice foothold there. So.
Yeah.
It does, and we're going to talk about the Knights Templar too here in a few minutes. So, and you'll see how that ties in, because there's an interesting story on that.
Yes.
Well, that's super fun. I can't wait to get into that. Brother Wayne, do you have anything from your book you want to show off?
No, not yet. I just brought it out. I'm almost done reading it. It's called Freemasonry and Catholicism by Max Heimdall is the name. Just a small little book. It's more like a little bit of essays back and forth. Yeah.
Okay.
There's some... I'll maybe read the summary depending upon where this goes in here. And it sort of hits on some of the conversations we had with Brother Barry in the last episode, and then at the Alpine afterwards. Mm-hmm. The Alpine, downtown Meridian, looking for sponsors all the time. Todd, hit us up.
There we go.
But it's I don't know how universally accepted some of the takes are in here. For some of it, it was the first time for me ever hearing some of the stuff. And
Okay.
I've been in Masonry for going on 20 years now. So
Well, the interesting part on write-ups from doing my research is, what does the person who's writing know about both organizations? Because in some of the writings, the writers are not putting forth both sides of the argument. They don't seem to have done any exploration into what is Freemasonry and how does the Catholic Church see Freemasonry, and then what makes the Catholic Church see Freemasonry through the lens that they see Freemasonry. I didn't find many articles in my research about Masons being anti-Catholic. Most of the write-ups that I read, we accept everybody as a Freemason regardless of religious persuasion, as long as they can take their oaths on a volume of sacred literature. That's the only difference. The Catholic Church will have an argument against that.
yes. And I think as a whole, that's how we are. And then just individual basis, anything that you've encountered, so on and so forth, might lend a brother to have a different skew of Catholicism, maybe, depending upon the interactions they've had with Catholics and those different kind of things, as I have had in the past, and different kinds of pieces. But it goes along that lines. Yeah, we're not anti them
Right.
as an institution, but if they start saying stuff to us that maybe on an individual basis we may not like certain ones of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And is the discussion they're having based on ignorance of what Freemasonry truly is versus what they've been told it is?
Yes.
And that's a tough one, because trying to work through that to offer an alternative to it is very difficult, because a lot of people are set in their ways of, no, this is what Masons are.
Yeah.
All right, so this all kind of started like a few months ago, probably, where the Pope, said Catholics can't be Freemasons, right? And then shortly after that, at the Scottish Rite meeting, you actually had a whole timeline.
Yes, I did a presentation.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. Pope Francis put a letter out, and it's a letter to the Bishop of the Philippines. The Philippine bishop was upset that the Catholics in Philippines were becoming Masons. And they were becoming Masons because of social and fraternal organization. They wanted a place to go to be with other men and to be able to socialize and have a fraternity and be part of it. Well, he wrote a letter to the Pope requesting clarity, because in 300 years, the Catholic Church has put out 600 documents opposed to Freemasonry. The latest was 1983. However, it had been ambiguous since 1962 to 1965 during the Second Vatican Council, because at that time they redid some of the codes and they took the name Masons out of the codes. It was no longer in it. So Catholics figured they could become Masons based on the fact that it was no longer listed as a prohibitive organization. Well, the Pope, citing the 1983 by then Cardinal Ratzinger, stating that no, because it was omitted didn't mean that the prohibition didn't still exist. However, what changed with Cardinal Ratzinger was pretty significant, because prior to that, the Catholic Church's Code of Conduct, which came into being in 1917, prohibited Catholics from becoming a Mason with the consequence of being excommunicated. Now, excommunication entails not being able to attend Mass, not being able to receive Holy Communion, not being able to have a funeral Mass, not being able to be buried in a Catholic cemetery. It was pretty much, you were cut off from the Catholic Church. Well, Cardinal Ratzinger says no. Okay, at this point, you're not in good standing with the Church, therefore you can't receive Holy Communion. That's the only interdict in it, no Holy Communion. Well, Pope Francis has now reiterated that no, Catholics cannot. His little quote on it is, active membership in Freemasonry by a member of the faithful is prohibited because of the irreconcilability between Catholic doctrine and Freemasonry. And the question becomes, what does that mean? Well, it means that the initial condemnation of Freemasonry came about in 1738, when the Pope put out an edict and said it was a secret organization. They took oaths. They did not worship one God. That'll be a little different. It'll come out as it's indifferentism, which means if you believe in another God, quote unquote, hold on.
Well, it's our God is better than your God.
Basically, ours is the true God,
right,
and
exactly.
yours isn't.
Yes.
Because you swear on a volume of sacred literature of your denomination.
Even though they're a younger faith than some older faiths, there's still the true.
Absolutely.
Well, whatever.
So, based on that, and then naturalism. And naturalism was kind of an interesting one, because naturalism is the advent of the Age of Enlightenment. It is when the scientific method's coming into being, and we can now question what the laws of nature are. Well, the Pope didn't quite like that at the time.
So in that time then too, if we're talking that kind of natural, we're talking Newton, but we're talking all the authors, we're talking like even Mary Shelley, natural philosophy she's writing about in Frankenstein. That's the big thing going across Europe at that time, is that you can understand through your observations of nature.
Right.
You can understand creation, and you can do all these other things that somebody else has a stranglehold on.
Yeah.
And the Pope's argument against that is you're giving human reason power over God.
Right.
Because God is through revelation and not through human reason. So naturalism, no, you can't have that as a basis of your organization. And they did. The bit with oaths is the Catholic Church believes that oaths can only be through the church, marriage, becoming a priest. Those are oaths, as well as being sacraments. So no oath taking. The only other legitimate oath taking is to the state. You can take an oath to the state. You can become a police officer. You can join the military. But other than that, those are the only two organizations acceptable for making oaths.
So what about testifying in court?
That's acceptable, because that's government.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
To the state.
There's a lot of exceptions.
There's tons of exceptions, except for the Masons.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
no
yeah.
exception
We can't
for the
have exceptions for
Masons.
that.
The Masons, no, you can't do that.
We are just horrible people, folks.
Well, it's just funny too, because most of us are, well, not most, there's a lot of us who are cops or former military,
Yeah.
just kind of
It's okay here, but it's not there.
Yeah.
So the real big issues within the Catholic Church come about when the 1917 and the 1983. But you have to look at the historical context of how all these 600 documents come in, as well as 1917 and 1983. In 1738, when Pope Clement on Rome, when the Pope put out his edict, you have the Jacobite Wars going on. So you have the King of Scotland trying to reassert authority against the King of England. Technically, Catholics versus Protestants.
This is what I was just going to ask, reflecting on our visit with our Episcopalian friend.
Catholics versus Protestants. Ironically, about that time, there's a very small population of Catholics in Scotland. It's almost all Protestant by that time. However, they supported the Jacobites, but they supported because they wanted their freedom from England. And that goes back to 1690, when the Glorious Revolution, when it was finalized that yes, England is now a monarchy that the government will accept. And the church is no longer in power. The Protestant church is pretty much the Church of England. You had the Gaston.
He's right there above you.
Right, and that's where it comes from. So from 1705 to 1745, there's the Jacobite Wars going on. The Masons are formed in 1717, the four in England. And they're formed by Enlightenment people who believe in liberty, freedom, and equity. Well, the Catholic Church is reacting to that because what has been monarchy and church. It doesn't find that acceptable at that point in time. So over the course of the next 200 years, 8 popes will issue edicts against Freemasonry. In 1884, when the big document came out with a bunch of Catholic teachings for bishops to give to the lay people, it was reiterated that no Masons, you can't have them. And the question was, why in 1884? Well, in 1861, the reunification of Italy starts. The reunification of Italy, some of the leaders just happened to be Masons. And the church is battling the Masons from the 1700s all the way through in England. Therefore, can't have the Masons. And what will happen as a consequence of the reunification, which does take place, I believe it's 1881, is the Vatican loses the Papal States. They become part of Italy. The Vatican now is Vatican City. It's no longer has its own territories and its own states within Italy. That did not bode well. So in 1884, the big edict. There's a lot of other stuff in it that came about as a consequence of them losing their status of power, but it occurred. In 1917, the church now will put out a code of conduct. It has never had that in its existence. It's always had papal edicts, it's had letters, it's had all kinds of ways to get out information, but it's never had a code of conduct, which are laws, and they put out a lot of them. And the major one regarding Masons is it was prohibited and it was excommunicated. But what's going on? You've got World War I. Monarchies are all being taken away from in Europe. They're no longer in power. The Catholic Church is losing its power. because you've got Christians fighting Christians. How do you do that? You know, you have a problem. So now you put out all this new codes of this is what the Catholic Church is, this is what the Catholic Church believes, and if you don't agree with it, time for you to leave. And the question becomes, what makes it important? Because there's a distinction here. This is all happening in Europe. None of this happens here in America. And in America, Catholics are becoming Masons because they're a little more liberal in their belief systems, even though it isn't believed they're that much more liberal. But they were a little more liberal, and Catholics were becoming. In 1962, when the Second Vatican Council comes around, they revise prohibitations. Now you have to be sort of humored by the 1917 code because it also banned membership in the Kiwanis and other fraternal organizations. It wasn't just the Masons.
Oh yeah, gotta be fair.
Yeah.
Ban them all.
They banned fraternal organizations.
They got to hold the power. Right?
That had secrets.
Right.
Because they're the only secret organization allowed.
Yeah.
You can't be secret. So those all came into play. And then it wasn't well written about what was going on because they left out all the organizations. It just said those who oppose the state. Well, in my lifetime, which is the last 70 plus years, I don't know any Masonic organization that's opposed the government.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, if you read the history of America, a lot of it is based on Masonic principles.
Yep.
In fact, a lot of them were Masons,
Yeah.
including presidents.
Mm-hmm.
So for the church to be having such a struggle, it's really in Europe.
Yeah.
It truly isn't an American issue.
Well, it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like it stems from that split, like we heard from Very Reverend when he was here. It feels like that split sort of lets some hurt feelings around, and because Episcopalians, like he was saying, many of the founding fathers, if they were Masons, they were Episcopalian.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, they were here and they were doing this and they were doing that, and then we were, talking like even like the oath of office has a lot of our lingo in it, and the oath of naturalization that new citizens take has a lot of our lingo in it.
Right.
So there are all these foundational capstone pieces behind everything else that we see, and it feels like there's also older stuff, but that split, that Church of England Protestant, that feels like a big, like, okay, you're siding with these guys, we're going to still continue to pile on, even as we get to 2024, and it's becoming just like, why?
Yeah. Unnecessary.
It seems as if the church has backed itself into a corner,
Yeah.
and it doesn't know how to address it today. Because in all my readings and in my experience, I have not seen anybody try to find out what Masonry is really about.
Yeah.
It's about what they think it's about, it's thoughts they project on it, and it's based on doctrine and dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And those change. They don't always remain the same.
Yeah. Well, quick question before you continue on too with that, because if I was listening right now, I'd have a question. I'd have a question for you is what sparked you onto this line of discourse?
Well, I'm raised Catholic.
Without asking, that's what I was going to ask.
Right, right.
Because we don't ask.
Yeah. Don't tell.
I'm an RC. Okay. Now, to understand that is I'm Roman Catholic.
Okay.
By birth. Okay. My parents came to this country to escape religious persecution. We come from Northern Ireland. And in the 50s, it wasn't as good for Catholics.
Yeah.
Okay. The Catholic Church has gone in directions since the 50s that has really changed. It's no longer the Catholic Church, because when they did Vatican II, which is the quotation marks around that, is they changed a lot of the doctrine and teachings, which brings up your question of why are they still doing it if they can change their doctrines and dogmas? And they still give the same 4 reasons: secrecy, oaths, like that. Well, it's not a secret society. I mean, we're sitting here, and anybody that goes on the internet will be able to hear, see, or know what we're doing.
Way much more than what we're doing.
Yeah.
We have a couple of things that quote unquote are secret, but every Mason knows them, and it's not that big of a secret.
Right.
No.
It doesn't deal with our teachings. Our teachings are well known. They're out there. There's books everywhere. But the church doesn't seem to have read any of those books.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'd know we're not in antagonism to them. And yes, as being raised a Catholic, I became a Mason in 2001. And in 2007, there was pushback for me being a Mason, so I withdrew from being a Mason. In 2019, I had decided that my Catholic faith was not going to impede me from being a Mason, that I enjoyed being a Mason, I enjoyed what Masonry stood for, and I was going to find a way back. In 2022, I joined Meridian Lodge. Then when this story came out, it was like, this is interesting, because Pope Francis is reaffirming a doctrine, a dogma that I believe has seen its day. Because the Catholic Church is moving in all of these new directions that were totally unheard of 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Whereas this has been ongoing for almost 300 years. And it doesn't put people in a good light within the church.
And it's kind of funny to see the appeasements that they'll make, throughout over time, like as society changes and grows, but then the things that they'll kind of let go of, but then this kind of thing that they hold on to.
Stick a hard line.
Yeah.
Well, part of that also is Pope Francis is from Argentina. The Masons in Argentina have been fighting for freedom in Argentina ever since the colonial period.
Yeah, it was there for some time.
And it's still, there's a lot of resentments going on in the church regarding the Masons, because they pushed freedom in Latin America. They were part of the Mexican Revolution at the turn of last century. And they've been pushing to get religion out of the state. They don't mind religion being religion, but they don't want its influence in the state in Latin America. So that's still ongoing there. You'll read articles that will still have the church arguing against the French version of Masonry. You'll still read articles about a very unfortunate incident that happened within the church in the 1980s, where there's an organization called Propaganda Do. But when you understand what Propaganda Do was and the outcome of it, you have to kind of shake your head. Because Propaganda Do was originally a Masonic organization. They lost their charter in 1976. some enterprising individual took the name over and hoodwinked a bunch of people into joining it, and somehow convinced the Catholic Church to invest a lot of money in it. And when all the criminal activity came out, the Catholic Church was left holding the bag. They lost face, they lost a lot of money, and they blamed the Masons. But it was no longer a Masonic organization. They'd lost their charter. They were not recognized by anybody as a Masonic organization. They're still having troubles with that. That's where the 1983 edict came out from the church, authored by then Cardinal Ratzinger.
Yes. Whole group punishment.
Yeah.
One kid does something wrong, and you force it on everybody.
Yeah. One kid does something wrong who's not even there at the time.
Yeah, so you have the issue of Latin America, which is still learning how to become free and how to organize governments, and the whole process of how to overcome the colonial period and become the nations that they've set themselves out to be.
That would be a very, quick sideline, thought bubble just popped in my head. That would be a very cool conversation to have with brothers, not just ones that visit, but brothers from South America, to understand exactly what you're saying. Because that colonial period, it's not super recent.
Right.
It's not super old, but it's not super recent. And still, it's like, yeah, there is a ton of all the different issues. Just what we see on TV, we see a minor with cartels and all that kind of stuff. But just to get their viewpoint on what it's actually like and what their society is trying to do, and it's crazy.
Yeah, how they're trying to come into modernity from having been subjugated to other governments. It's just a fascinating topic to go through, and how you have a cardinal who became a pope, who his country went through all that problem because in the 70s, the dictatorship in Argentina, the suppression of the Catholic Church, there is a history there. And as Brother Wayne's talking, it would be really great to have the Masons from there come and give us historical context. Where are they at now with all these major shifts and changes? And I do believe that the Pope was greatly influenced in that in putting out the letter, because that letter would never have been made public to the degree it was, because it was just a letter to a bishop in response to a question. It wasn't really a major issue for the Catholic Church. So what made him do that, and my take on it, is the historical context of Latin America, colonialism, and the Catholic Church, because part of that issue is the complicity of the Catholic Church in it, and are we going to talk about that? Because that's been one of the major problems in Latin America, is how closely united the Catholic Church was to the governments. It's a big issue.
Yeah.
But here in America, the Masonic population of Catholics estimated is, I still believe, about 220,000.
Pretty good number.
230,000, with about 2 million Masons worldwide. So there's a lot of Catholics that are taking these teachings kind of as, okay, you have it, I'll make an informed decision here of the cost benefit. What am I going to get out of being a Mason versus what I'm getting out of the Catholic Church? Are they compatible? I believe in one God. They believe in one God. I believe in reason. They believe in reason with limitations. Secrecy. Well, there's secrecy in the Catholic Church. So where's the issues? How is it that we can continue this argument? over and over. Now, the argument about naturalism I always like, because if you read the Jefferson Bible, he takes naturalism to the nth degree, because he's eliminated anything that human reason cannot explain in the Bible. It's a very small Bible. It is not huge because a lot of it's been removed. How did we part the Red Sea? Whoops, that gets to go.
Yeah.
Manna from the sky? Whoops, that gets to go. And then the biggest one in it is the resurrection. Is it there or isn't it? Because human reason can't explain it.
Yeah.
So Mr. Jefferson's Bible is real tiny.
Yeah.
It's just, it gives you kind of a quick tour of the Bible.
Yeah.
If you want to read the real thing, maybe you have to go back to it. But that's where naturalism can go to the degree that the church is concerned about.
Yeah, of course.
But that's not what most people do.
No.
In fact, if you read the Declaration of Independence, he pretty much covers everything that was in the Bible in a very short document. You know, it's a very religious document in its own right.
Yeah.
So where is the Catholic Church's argument? I'm struggling to hear it, even after reading all the documents it has regarding the church.
Yeah. They would fall into that realm of they lose their footing. You know, when we say in our Declaration of Independence that it's the Creator who has given you these unalienable rights, it loses that footing. You know, their God versus our God, our dogma, our way.
And you brought up Newton earlier. Gravity. It's a law. It's considered a natural law.
Yeah.
Well, if it's natural law, it had to come from somewhere.
Right.
If you name it God, great. And if Islam names it Allah, and Buddhists name it Buddha, where's the difference?
Yeah.
We're still talking about one universal being as a creative principle. We're not arguing that my God has more power than your God. And there's nowhere in Masonry that they're arguing when God is greater or lesser than another God.
Yeah.
They're saying, put them all on the table and choose. We respect your choice.
Yeah.
But Pope Francis isn't giving us the choice. He's telling us, this is your choice.
Yeah.
My way or not. That's not Masonry. Masonry lets you make choices. They're concerned about oaths. When you take an oath within Masonry, you're advised prior to taking the oath whether you want to proceed or not. You have the ability to say, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I will leave. And it's explained in great detail. It's not, hey, we're going to give you an oath, this is it.
Yeah.
They actually tell you the consequences of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
And what it will impact.
Yeah.
Right.
What, you know.
So it's an informed decision.
Right.
How many people have joined the Catholic Church as an informed decision? That's a question to ask.
Yeah.
Did you join because your wife was Catholic and you agreed to go along? Do you continue going because you agree with principles it's teaching?
Or were you born into it?
Right.
That's no choice.
Right.
Yeah.
I was born into it.
Yeah.
Then I had to make a choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas with us, you have to be of a certain age before you can even make that choice. So yeah, it's
Right. Yeah. You have to believe in a God, but God's belief in you that's your choice. It is not Masonry.
So, so many other pieces we could keep rolling with this, but I know that you said a couple of keywords earlier that always strike up people's attention spots, and this might be a good time to transition to that. You said the K and the T, you said Knights Templar earlier.
Right.
So that might be a good...
Yeah.
This is a great part of Masonry, and especially concerning the Scottish Rite, because in the 1884 edict that came out from the Pope, Albert Pike, who was the supreme commander of the Scottish Rite at the time, took issue with it because he declared it a war against Masonry. And he also named the Catholic Church as being a tyranny, that it wasn't free, it didn't give you choices. It was very interesting. So, and Mr. Pike, Brother Pike, also is responsible for the degree work in Scottish Rite. Well, there was a degree called the Knights Templar. Well, after the Pope's edict, he fine-tuned it to make sure he would get the ire of the Pope in the degree work. So it's fine-tuned to the degree that it points out that Jacques de Molay ended up being executed in 1314, if I'm right.
13.
Is being executed. And again, this is another part of the schism in the Catholic Church, because Jacques de Molay was a Knights Templar. He was the last leader. He was tried by the Inquisition in 1307 by the Pope. But this is a schism Pope. The church is in Rome, and the church is in Avignon. King Philip of France makes sure that the Pope is elected, his Pope. The King Philip is almost bankrupt, according to the records. He needs money. Well, the people who got the most money are the Knights Templar. So he convinces the Pope to have Jacques de Molay tried. Well, he's tried, but nothing really comes of it. Then when push comes to shove in 1314, the king intervenes, and 62 Knights Templars are executed. Mr. Jacques was executed in front of the king, and at that point, the Knights Templar were gone. Well, Mr. Brother, I should say, Pike, wrote the Knights Templar to point out that this was what the Catholic Church had done, in cooperation with. But the reason the Pope wouldn't go be the Pope in Italy was there was war raging there. So he didn't want to go back there. He stayed in there. So Jacques de Molay ended up being executed, and the church for the next 70 years will be in Avignon and not in Rome. So he wrote that whole degree in response to the Pope.
And that is still one of my favorite degrees to watch, because I don't think I can really talk about what happens in it, but the message is very clear, kind of like what you said, when it's communicated, and I really like it.
There has to be a separation between church and state. It does not work when there's a church religion of the state. Now, we have many arguments you can have that certain political parties are religious. Hey, that's great. But when a religion's religious and they have undue sway in the government, bad things happen.
Oh, yeah.
And that we can, again, thank Mr. Jefferson and his friends for, because that was what they were arguing for. So the Knights Templar shows you is a degree that can show you what can happen when the two collude because they need more power.
Unchecked.
Very unchecked.
Yeah. So, again, as with the first pieces you were talking about, probably also a particular interested area of study for you. So you probably have your own opinions on some stuff. And man, it is great. It's so funny. It's great. You can turn on almost any streaming channel now, like History Channel, Apple, blah, 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 all these other, Amazon, they all have these shows, and they're all coming out all the time. Knights Templar, the Knights Templar, the Knights Templar. And then it's so funny because the years change, and a little bit of things here and there, like you're saying, it almost gets confusing for us. When was he actually executed? Yeah, because he was on trial for all these years, and the whole story of they were all rounded up across all of Europe and Spain. No.
No.
We know, no.
No.
And then we have at that time or after that time, you talked earlier about the kings and the King of Scotland, and there's many pieces of documentation that they aided greatly in Bannockburn by knights of a particular white vestment, etc., depending upon the literature that you read, and those guys shouldn't be existing, right?
Right.
So King Philip, besides being bad with his money, wasn't a really good PR guy.
No.
I think, the thing that strikes me as funny is you're dealing with an organization in the Knights Templar that created the first mobile ATMs.
Yep.
You could go from Europe all the way down to the Holy Land, check your money in one place, get the code, get your money out in another place. This is high-level sophistication, and he's just so full of himself that he's able to say, oh yeah, they're done.
Yep.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. I mean, you don't even need communication for the Templars to understand, no, we're just going to do this.
And they were one of the greatest supporters of the church.
Yeah. Created by the church.
The church wouldn't exist in the Middle East anymore if it hadn't been for them.
But it was, like you said, it wasn't their pope any longer.
No.
Their pope had been dead for quite some time.
Yep.
Who brought them in. When we were 2 summers back over in Europe on a school trip, when we were going through France, and we were going by, and I saw some of the old places that I recognized from other studies, and then we went by, I forget what it's called, one of the structures now. I want to say, maybe I'm going nuts, maybe it even was the Louvre that was originally one of the palaces for the king or whatever. But there was another one, really big stronghold, and so I asked the guy, was that for the king's military or was that a Templar one? Because even at that time, I can imagine what it was like in France. And some of the shows do pretty good with it, like Nightfall and others. You see the visual difference between the Templar Order and the King's Knights. And it plays out like all these other stories of, just like this jealous guy. And, and he's got to get his mitts on the goods. So there was... in that line of thought as well, and we had talked about this before, Bryce and I and some other brothers have talked about this. I don't know if I've talked with you about it before, but maybe you have a thought process on this now as well. So the purge occurs, and the standard logic is that they took their ships and they went to Portugal and they went to Scotland, they started the Knights of Christ in Portugal, all these other things, whatever, and maybe they went to Oak Island, who cares, whatever. I'm not going to get into all that kind of stuff.
No.
But my line of reasoning and some others, and it'd be interesting again to hear what you have to say about it, is why not do like our soldiers did after World War I? Our soldiers after World War I come back to an America they don't understand. So they expatriated. They went back and they lived in Europe. Why wouldn't the Templars do that? Why wouldn't they go down to Muslim territories and take up that oath? Because in our 25th degree, we understand those Sufi masters are all Druze. And I've talked about the Druze before, and they are very devout to their core religion, but you're never going to know their core religion because whatever country they're in, they become that country's religion.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if they went to any place, I would assume they would have went to Spain, because Spain is under the Moorish rule.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't they go there? Because they'd be welcomed.
Yeah.
And they could have gone to Scotland, like some writers say.
Mm-hmm.
But why would they leave? I mean, going to other places and learning other customs and learning another language, it's not all that easy.
No.
It really isn't. So they could have easily blended in, because while the kings have control, they have limited control.
Right.
I mean, in the old days, prior to having the one king, every country had numerous kings. And that's where we come up with the title of King of Kings.
Right.
Is because you could rotate in and become the king that year of the kings. Now, when they get into this monarchy, you have a single king. Okay. But they could have just blended in. There was the only ones that I know that were executed were quote unquote the leaders.
Right.
But the regular people, they probably just blended in. I mean, after William of Orange takes over England pretty much, he offers the Scottish people no retribution, no retaliation if you just swear fidelity to the government. He wasn't going to kill everybody off, just the leaders. And that's what the king did. He killed everybody off that was a leader, but the rest could have blended in, and they would have chosen new leaders and kept on going.
Yeah.
Just because you lose a leader doesn't mean you become disenfranchised. No.
Well, and the other funny side, the king, to anybody's knowledge, didn't take their knowledge. It's like when I taught in class, and we're in high school, and we're talking about humanities. I was doing some classes and stuff like that, and we talk about the Dark Ages, and I talk about how, there's all this knowledge, and Rome has heated baths and internal plumbing and all this kind of stuff, and then we're told through history, here come the barbarians, they destroy everything, and then they're throwing poop at each other. That's our description of what life is like, until all of a sudden we go down into these holy wars, and we bring back glasses, and we bring back paper, and we bring back math, and all this other different kind of stuff. So they have this banking system, they have all these things they're doing, and that doesn't come back around again for how many hundreds of years? I mean, if you were a smart king, I would think you would take their plans and use them.
Yeah.
It worked well for them,
Well, they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Is what they did, because they also had medical care.
Yeah.
Because they learned on the battlefield, you got to have medical care. So that became for everybody. It didn't become just for the soldiers. It became where they lived. They took over medical care. They brought a lot of good to what they did. And unfortunately, when monarchies, tyranny take over, they kind of get rid of all the good and keep all the bad. Go figure.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the French banking system got any better after they got rid of them.
No, but it's not good for the king. I mean, it's the same thing. If you're in control, you're trying to be the one in power, right?
Yep.
You don't want the people having good stuff. You want them breaking their backs every day so that they can't have time to think.
Well, and the interesting thing is when you bring up the Dark Ages, that's where this whole issue of anti-Masonry can be kind of looked at. Because during the Dark Ages, the two forms of power become crystallized. You have the power of the government, and then you have the authority of the church. And they're forever battling each other, because who is in charge? The Pope Francis here is trying to exert authority. He has no power to enforce this. Well, during the Middle Ages, these two, the authority and the power, had to cooperate, because otherwise it was absolute chaos. And as you talk about the fall of Rome, that's where the fall of Rome will really come in, is because they lose the cooperation between authority and power. Nobody believed in their power anymore, because they had the world's greatest authority, was the Roman Empire. They'll lose it because of a lot of different things. Well, the Catholic Church now is operating on authority. It's not operating on power. It has no coercive power. And you could actually see that if you go through the 1917 to the Vatican II to the 1983 to this, because it all keeps getting lesser and lesser of what they can tell you to do or not do. So they're even losing the authority they thought they had.
You have any final question, Brother Bryce? I know we're getting close, and we could, like so many of our talks, we could just keep going.
Just to kind of point out here after this, whole lesson about the Templars and everything, that's kind of why we picked our name, right? Templar on the Run. Specifically because after this kind of, persecution from the Catholic Church, like, where are these guys going to go that weren't executed, and what kind of knowledge did they kind of take away? And what did they share? And, I don't know, it's kind of like the zeitgeist of what we're trying to do in a way, right?
Yeah, and it also comes back to, thinking in my head, I'm like, my goal ultimately is creating bridges and commonality. And it almost feels like it's a waste of breath to say, because I would love to just sit down with those 4 core pieces that you noticed, their 4 objections with us.
Right.
Sit down with a couple of the leaders here locally and just, okay, let's talk about these 4 points.
And ironically, those 4 points in the mid-40s to 50s, Catholic priests became Masons because of those 4 points. Because they saw the value in the oaths.
Right.
They saw the value in having limited secret. Because it's what unites you. It's not what drives you apart.
Exactly.
So then they start putting pressure on the priests not to become Masons.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked on me. I left for a while and I came back.
And you were in California at that time, right?
Yes, I was
Idaho.
in California at that time. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's the land where your soul goes to die, so.
California? Well, there went our listenership from.
Yeah. Oh, Antelope Valley, yes indeed.
Yes, sir. And I know that area. Lived there for the majority of my life. So,
Awesome.
It's a nice place to visit.
yeah.
Brother Wayne, Brother Kevin, any last thoughts here?
Well, I hope people understand that Masonry has nothing against the Catholic Church. But what the Catholic Church has against Masonry is really projected thoughts on what doesn't exist.
Right.
And if we could, as Brother Wayne suggests, sit down and let's have a discussion on 4 points.
Yeah.
You'll find out we have agreement. We don't have disagreement.
Right.
But you would have to be willing to sit down, and at this point, that's not an option.
Yeah.
So Masons get to make up their own mind. Gee, that's what Masonry's about.
It's just weird.
Giving you the power to make up your own mind.
Yeah.
The fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Gee, that's such a simple concept.
Yeah.
And it gets so messed up when religion gets involved.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I've always loved about it. It doesn't matter what religion you are, just so long as you have that belief in something higher than yourself, and then that immortality of the soul and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have a belief in higher power, AA is there for you. That'll be your organization.
There you go.
On that note, Brother Bryce, you fill us in where our ever-expanding audience can find us.
Yes, our podcasts are on Spotify and Google Podcasts under Templar on the Run. It's our YouTube channel as well, where we've got a lot of the more recent episodes filmed up there. Templar on the Run on Reddit, on Twitter. Our Instagram, though, is Temp on the Run. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to email us at templarontherun@gmail.com. We're on TikTok too, Templar on the Run. If you just Google Templar on the Run, I'm sure you'll find us somewhere.
Find something.
So,
Mm-hmm.
thank you again, Brother Kevin, for coming
Thank
out,
you, Brother Brooks.
enlightening us.
Yes, thank you for coming out. I'm not going to reach across the board and hit a board, or I've already hit my knees on this a couple of times and probably get some reverb. So
I already hit that. So.
That's all right.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you, brothers, for inviting me on, and I hope it's been a little bit of enlightenment for people that the Masons are what they say they are. They're a fraternal organization that serves.
And it's important because you know both sides.
Yep.
So, very important.
And we know where all the secret vaults of treasure are buried.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's in the Vatican Library and Museum.
There we go. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening to Templar on the Run, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, brothers.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to Templar on the Run. Please check us out at Twitter and Reddit at Templar on the Run. Our Instagram is at Temp on the Run. We got TikTok at Templar on the Run. And if you have any questions or anything else that you can't reach us on any of those other platforms, please send them to templarontherun@gmail.com. We thank you for listening and have a great day.